Welcome to Barnyard Language, honest talk about running farms and raising families. We are Katie and Arlene, an Iowa sheep farmer and an Ontario dairy farmer, with 6 kids, 2 husbands, and a whole lot of chaos between us.
While this is a podcast for farm families, sometimes our content isn't for the whole family. So kick off your boots, reheat your coffee, and join us for some Barnyard Language.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Barnyard Language, the hot as hell version, if you are in the places where Katie and I live. But, it is June, and I suppose these things happen. But yeah, when you get to over 70% humidity and you don't want to walk outside your door or away from your fan, that's where we are right now. So, Katie, how hot is it in Iowa?
I actually just turned off the air conditioning because it has been running nonstop, like literally nonstop for the last 72 hours. And I find the white noise of the air conditioning fan to be extremely sleep-inducing.
So if you want to get anything done, like a 5-minute recording, you need to turn it off.
Yeah. Also, it's only like 75 today, which is still pretty warm and sticky. But when I woke up, I don't know if it was Friday or Saturday morning at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was still 80 degrees out, which is beyond shorts and t-shirt weather for me, for our non-American friends. When it was also like 99% humidity. And then Saturday, the real feel, which is, humidity plus temperature, was at like 113 or something, which is like what you expect in Phoenix, except still like 90% humidity, which just means that like not only will you not dry off after a shower, but you will actually become damper as the day goes on. Like, it's really just disgusting.
Yeah, exactly.
How has it been at your house?
Yeah, sounds like it's been similar. I actually have been milking in shorts, which I hate doing. I am definitely a wear, something on my legs all the time because I hate the feeling of straw on my extremities. But yeah, it's been hot enough that I couldn't even do that. And post milking, I do all the wash up stuff and usually throw on like one of those waterproof aprons. But yeah, it's more of a wet t-shirt contest going on in the washroom.
And like a totally not sexy wet t-shirt contest.
I can't handle it touching my legs. It is supposed to break here too. I think tomorrow there's hopefully not with a spectacular storm. There was a storm over the weekend, kind of when this system was moving in, and a bunch of people are still out of power. Thankfully, we are okay, but yeah, there's still some people who don't have any power yet from the last time. So I think it's supposed to break, but maybe not with a gigantic storm.
Yeah, we got a few storms yesterday and then last night, which is why we're recording this on Tuesday, because we were going to record and then my power started going in and out. I was like, you know what? Let's not. And that's even with the power lines buried, that it was flickering. When our power lines, we used to be at the end of the line, and it would, like, anytime anything happened, our power would go out. So it is nice now that we usually have power, but not always. So there is that.
Yeah. And what else is going on in Iowa? I hear you're might be a country at war, but maybe we're not going to talk about that. I don't know.
Fuck if I know. Honestly, I posted this morning that the president's tweets right now, and not to get too political, but I think we can all agree that his tweets look an awful lot like every stereotypical American standing on the front porch screaming at their kid to get back in the house before you beat their butt. Him telling Israel not to bomb Iran, or Iran not to bomb us. I'm losing track of who's bombing who at this point, but it's sure.
Yeah. Everyone's in timeout. Put your bombs away and stop.
Yeah, everybody get their butts back in the house. And honestly, I try not to pay too much attention to the news of the world because it's incredibly stress-inducing and there is literally nothing I can do about it. So I try to focus real hard on being one of the helpers that Mr. Rogers told us to look out for, and hoping that adding good intentions to the world is enough to keep us from getting blown off the face of the earth. I have my doubts on how that'll work, but it's what I can do. And it seems a little healthier than just like throwing back Xanax every 10 minutes. So
Yeah, that's right. Help in your own neighborhood, right?
we got first crop hay done over the weekend. And by we, I mean Jim and his dad and Dirk the rapper guy and Dirk the rapper guy's son, who at I think 10 is now old enough to run the rapper, which is pretty cool.
I love that we all know that rapper means the guy with the bale wrap and not Dirk, who is like a literal rapper.
That would be pretty awesome if I saw a middle-aged white guy from small town Iowa out here rapping and rapping.
Yeah.
Yes, I do mean that it is marshmallow season in our field. Jim said it's one of the largest hay crops we've had, but that this is the latest they've baled since 1993, which means that he was not a whole lot older than our children the last time we baled this late. Normally we try to bale on Memorial Day weekend, which is the last weekend in May. And today is June 20, 24th. Yay. So, yeah, we were done a little bit late. I also convinced my kids yesterday, taking them to daycare, that one of the neighbors' bales had gone free range and was escaping. We live in a pretty hilly place, and the neighbors had bailed off their ditch, but the bale, I'm assuming, was not where they had put it because it was in the road.
Right. Kind of like when people's garbage cans roll in the windy weather.
Yeah. Yeah. A few years ago, one of our neighbors lost a bale in their farm pond because same reason.
Right. Yeah. Once they start, you're not getting in front of it.
Yeah. And it's not hard to roll a large bale. And once they get any momentum whatsoever, they're not stopping. So there's that. The kids were pretty impressed that the neighbors' bales were just going rogue. We hatched some chicks last week. We have a very proud little Americana hen with 4 little Americana chicks who are, doing little chicken stuff. Other than that, hot as shit. If anyone has any tips for removing iron from pool water, it is now all settled at the bottom, but it's not coming out, and I refuse to pay $300 for a pool vacuum. So, next year, I think maybe we'll just pay to have water delivered because the chemicals and work necessary to get our well water frequently, if there's any disturbance to the well, comes out looking like Campbell's tomato soup. So you can imagine what our pool water looks like.
Right. But I bet it's still refreshing.
It is, and I feel like, and yes, I know this isn't how science works, it seems very unlikely that anyone's going to be anemic this summer, given the amount of iron that we were soaking in. It seems like it would have to be possible for there to be some transdermal.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure they'll absorb some.
I mean, I know it's not, and we wouldn't want it to be, but it feels healthy. Like, people go to those mineral hot springs,
Well, they're going to consume a lot in the pool too,
right?
as kids do.
I did find out last week that my children have developed a game called P-Tag. It works about the way it sounds like it would. So I added some more chlorine. That seems healthy.
I'm assuming you're not playing that game.
I'm not playing any games in Apple now. Anyway, Arlene, how have things been at your farm?
Well, we did some more hay as well. The hay life continues. I can't remember if I said it last week or this week. Anyway, some dry hay got done. Now we're waiting on a custom guy. We're going to do some in bags because we just want to have hay in every form this year. So we have wrap bales, we have dry bales. Now we're going to have some chopped in silage bags. So just spread the varieties out, and depending on the field, what it looks like, the quality of it, what form it's going to take. So I think that's supposed to happen this week. We are in the final days of school.
I like that you could offer your cows, artisanal balance of hand blended forage choices.
Yeah, that's right. Here's our hay menu. Which one would you like, ladies?
A little, instead of it would be a charcuterie board, I guess.
Tasting board of all 3 types. And then you'll have later season hay. Yeah, all the varieties.
Okay, so school.
Yeah, school is winding down. So as of today, 2 high schoolers have 1 exam each left. The elementary kid is doing his field trip today, and I think possibly for the first time, maybe ever, I am not on the field trip. Usually that's my thing. I like to go on the field trips, but they didn't ask for help this year, and I did already have a commitment and I was going to cancel it, and then I was like, well, I'll wait and see if they need any help. And there was no email saying that they needed additional volunteers. So he's just going to have to go on his field trip without his mom, which I'm sure he's absolutely fine with. He's 10. He's not going to think it's a big deal. But anyway, feels like a big deal to me. And it is thankfully in a space that is air conditioned and their school is not. So it's actually a better day and to be on a field trip than be in the classroom. I sent him with the good old Amazon neck fan, which he is quite excited about. I don't know how I missed him learning about the neck fan, but maybe I was keeping it to myself. I don't know. But he wore it last night. He and I have been going to a fishing club for the last 4 weeks, and last night was real hot. It's at the local waterfront, which is also in a park where all the local soccer teams are playing. So usually the parking lot is jam packed, and there's baseball diamonds there too. So it's all the soccer parents, all the baseball parents, all the people going to the splash pad, and us fishing people are all in the same parking lot. Last night, the splash pad is broken, unfortunately, and all of the sports ball games were canceled. So it was just the fishing people. So it was very peaceful last night for our last night of fishing. And he caught a big one. So that was very exciting too. It did not actually make it to shore. He got real close and jumped off the hook, but that's actually ideal because I seem to be the person taking the fish off the hooks anyway. So that seems to be my role.
As I imagine you're doing catch and release and not just eating this much fish.
Yes, yeah, it's yeah, definitely a catch and release, and a lot of them are like sunfish and like little tiny guys, but it's still been fun for him and learning about different kinds of lures and techniques and stuff. And he's not a big sports fan, so it's been something that was active and close to nature, but not running around and being really sad that he is the worst on the team, which is how he often feels, even if that is not the reality. So we're working on finding things that work for him.
I'm realizing increasingly that I don't really care if my kids don't do sports ball, but I do want them to have some relatively active outdoor activities that they enjoy. And I feel like fishing still counts as relatively active since we're not talking about taking the iPad outside to play Minecraft.
Yeah, that's true. There have been times in the summer where that's as far as I can push, right? It's like, ugh, the Wi-Fi works on the porch, go. But yes, it was good. And we've seen a beaver a few times and some loons and some ducks, and last night there were some duck babies. So yeah, even that kind of like nature appreciation type stuff is kind of cool, and identifying different kinds of fish. So yeah, it's been fun. He was pretty hesitant at first, as he is with anything new, but I pushed, and he admitted, even after our first night, that it was pretty fun. So sometimes moms are right, but I did not say that to him because I'm nice.
Yeah, it turns out it doesn't go over well.
No, exactly. It doesn't really help. Eh? I might bring it up the next time I sign him up for something he doesn't want to do, though. Just pull that one out there. But yeah, it probably won't work then either. I think that's some of the main stuff. Yeah, so trying to hobble our way to the end of school and see what comes next.
That'll be good.
Yeah, so why don't we go ahead and introduce our guest for this week?
All right.
Are you a farmer or butcher ready to master direct-to-consumer marketing and meet success?
The team at ChopLocal is standing by ready to help. Sell your meat on the ChopLocal marketplace. Check out all their free meat marketing educational resources at ChopLocal University. Hire the team to help you out or tune into their new podcast called Meat Success.
And remember, there's more than one recipe for meat success. Let us help you fine-tune yours today at ChopLocalUniversity.com. Today, we are excited to be talking to Amanda Freund, who is joining us from Connecticut. And we are excited to cross another state off of our list because we are working our way through Canada and the US. And so this is a new one for us. And Amanda, we always start our interviews with the same question. So we always ask, what are you growing? So our farmers usually tell us about crops and livestock, and people also tell us about kids and businesses and all kinds of other stuff. So what are you growing?
So just this last weekend, I planted my own garden, and my favorite thing to grow is nasturtiums. And the crop that is a perennial that's going to require a little bit more attention and further time is chestnut trees. So not the American chestnut. It's a hybrid that is going to be grown for the actual nut to be harvested. So we've had 3 chestnut trees growing around our farmhouse for 50 years. And so this is me looking to grow the next round of trees. So we're in year 1. It's going to be a few years before I start harvesting nuts, but I'm really looking forward to it.
Those are some exciting things. And what are you growing in terms of your business and your career?
So we are, every family, I think, that has a farming operation or a business, transition is always there. It's always looming. And so just a different stage or evolution of it. And so I think, we're starting to have real conversations about the future of what it looks like with my dad evolving out of the business. So I'm growing my capacity to take on a little bit more, to be a little more focused on kind of the production side of the business. And I'm hopefully growing my customer base and being able to expand the reach for all the places that our Cowpots products can grow.
Right. So why don't you tell us about both the farm and what cowpots are, because they are, well, not kind of, they are connected to each other, but they are separate streams too. So tell us, I guess, maybe first about the farm and then about cowpots.
So we are not in the business of making biodegradable pots from cow manure because we had a strong passion for working with cow manure, right? I mean, this isn't like, ooh, let's go invent a new way of managing this resource. Like, we're making cow pots because we were a dairy farm managing manure from 350 cows. And so in Connecticut, we don't have a finite, or we don't have an infinite land base, and we have a lot of neighbors. In fact, our dairy farm is right next to the largest campground in the state of Connecticut. So on a busy holiday weekend, it doubles the population of our town. So how we manage our manure has everything to do with community relations and being good neighbors and realizing that we are the size herd that we are because of the land base that we have access to apply those nutrients. So manure has defined and dictated a lot of aspects about our farming operation. And in addition to that, we have 2 rivers that bisect our farm. So when it comes to resource management and being good stewards of the land and water, there's a lot riding on our decisions and management of this crap. And so, we had been composting like many farmers do, and we are in the unique position where my mom, and joining the family business back in 1982, she started to pursue a separate kind of option. And instead of working with the cows with my dad, she started pursuing an expansion of the roadside corn stand. And so that has grown and evolved so that it's not the roadside anymore. It's now a 2-story post and beam, full year farm market, garden center, bakery, catering business. But, we were able to sell our compost through her farm market and garden center with the landscapers that came in. And so it was a great synergy. But then, you're only going to move manure so far with it as a compost product. So 15, 20 miles might be the radius. And so there then began this pursuit towards a creative, unique solution to managing manure in a different way. And so my dad ended up collaborating with a recently retired engineer who lived locally and was looking for another thing to keep his mind busy. And so together, they built the pilot machine, which we still use to this day. And so that was back in 2003, 2004, that they were actually building the equipment and infrastructure to take this crazy idea of making pots out of manure and turning it into not just an idea, but a tangible physical product that we could begin showing to people. And so, but the farm market had a real impact on our decision to be able to pursue this idea.
So when it comes to, I don't want you to give away any trade secrets, but is the ingredient basically just manure, or are there other things integrated in there to create a product that's that's using enough manure, but also is stable and, can be what your clients or your, what people need when they're looking for a pot like that?
Yeah, so for the first 10 years of our product going to market, our cows, we had the largest rotational grazing herd in the state of Connecticut. So our cows were on pasture in the summer and in the barn in the winter. And so they went from a heavily grass based diet to a TMR diet. And you can imagine the manure that they provide to us based on that shift in nutrition was significant. And so we early on identified the need to have a way to maintain a consistent product. So whether we were making cowpots in the summer or in the winter, we needed to make sure that the end product that our customer was getting was just the same. So we actually blend in recycled newspaper and post-consumer cardboard. So we have a pulper that we can pulp that material up. So it becomes, it's like paper mache a little bit, but it makes it into like globules. And so cardboard is an incredibly strong fiber. And so depending on the style product we're making and the thickness of that finished product will determine what that ratio is. It is always a majority manure. Usually we're running 60 to 80% depending on which item we're making, but that newspaper and cardboard being pulped up and blended in provides consistency because it's the same year round, and it provides some strength because they're very strong fibers.
So, Amanda, I know we raise cattle and sheep, and I know that the, shall we say, consistency between sheep poop and cattle poop is very different. Obviously, there's a lot of liquid in cow poop that is not normally there in sheep shit. What's the ratio between, shall we say, raw material and what's going into the cow pots? Because I'm assuming correct that it's composted and dry. And I will admit that when I'm picturing this paper mache, I'm picturing cereal boxes and like cow shit straight from the barn, which I know is not what's going on. And I'm assuming that it is a much less wet process in reality.
I imagine that your listeners are not new to being able to hear like the nuance and difference in different types of manure. So welcome, we're having that conversation. So we actually do quite a bit of processing to our manure. So cows, like sheep, are ruminants, and a big part of why we're able to do what we're doing with their byproduct is because of their digestion system. And so the reality is manure is basically corn, grass, some grain, right? I mean, manure is what they have been ingesting. And but as a ruminant, they have this incredible capacity to take those raw fibers and materials, and what we're looking for is the fiber that comes out the backside. So the manure is collected from our barn, it's delivered to our anaerobic methane digester, where we continue to provide the same environment for those microorganisms that naturally exist in the cow's gut. But now we're basically allowing them to continue doing exactly that, but in a tank. And so we keep it at a cow's temperature, which is just over 100 degrees, so that they are content and they are doing what they do, which is digesting and releasing methane, which in that tank we have the capacity to capture it, and we're burning that as a renewable biogas. So we're not generating electricity from our digester, but we are capturing the biogas and we're using that for creating heat. And so once the manure has kind of its first in, first out, right? So with each new delivery of manure, it pushes the older material out. And so then that digested manure is going through a screw press separator, which is pretty common on a lot of dairy farms. And so basically, we're squeezing the liquid out. So the manure passes through a screen, the liquid can exit. We store that in a lined lagoon, which we will then use for fertility for our cropland. And then the fibers are then delivered to a composter. So the manure is about 85% liquid. I mean, most of what cows give us is liquid. None of that is of any interest for us in our cowpots production. That is all used for crop fertility. So the 15% of their manure that is actually solid, that's delivered into a composter where we do a heat treatment. And then it's that product that's digested, separated, composted, which is what's coming over into our cowpots facility. So when it arrives to our factory, it's about 35% dry matter. So there's still a good bit of moisture there, but most of that liquid has actually been taken out.
So, am I correct then in thinking that the methane is kind of the argument against a lot of animal agriculture from an environmental perspective? That it's that methane going into the atmosphere that's, I don't want to say troublesome, argumentative, perhaps? What's the.
Yeah, greenhouse gas emissions are certainly one of the obstacles that animal agriculture has to be prepared to discuss. And, you know, it's not binary, right? It's not yes or no, this or that. So there's greenhouse gas emissions involved in our entire food system, whether you're eating soybeans or avocados. I mean, if it's not in the production of the crop, it's the transporting of the crop. And so, one of the, I think, incredible stories that dairy has is that the average person is when you go and choose to buy milk at the grocery store and put that in your refrigerator at home, that milk has traveled less than 100 miles to get to you. And it goes from farm to store shelf in a matter of 48 hours. So if we look beyond just the cost of production, and when I say cost, I mean not just, financial, but also environmental, and we actually seriously consider all the other pieces, the packaging and the transport, I think actually dairy has an incredible story to tell. And there's so much attention on what we can do as farms to reduce that emission impact. And so, digesters are just one of the pieces. There's a lot of research going into additives that go into a cow's diet so that not just how we handle her manure, but generally as a cow and being a ruminant, she herself, her enteric emissions are a real thing that needs to be measured. And so you can't manage what you don't measure. And so the first place to start is to know exactly what we're dealing with. And then I have no doubt that the industry and our partners are going to actually really do an incredible job of making it so that dairy is a net zero emissions contributor to the food system in the next 20 years.
I think that's amazing. I will say that one of my many special interests is things that really take full advantage of every part of something that we can use. And the idea beyond the whole argument about greenhouse gases, which is a very valid thing, but the idea that we can have a cow who's producing milk, who's making butter, who's making cheese, who's making meat, all of which are amazing, fantastic things. I very much love butter and cheese and meat and cows for that matter. But, we can be using the methane from nat waste, using the solids from nat waste for something productive, and then still getting that liquid fertility off there. So we're not having to, replace the fertility from the cow shit with something else. We're not losing anything. And to me, that's just amazing because there's so many opportunities there. And it's so great to see that and to be able to talk to consumers about the opportunities from these things rather than it being, well, now what do we do with this huge pile of cow shit? And also, I'm going to use the phrase enteric emissions from now on with my children instead of farts because I think they will probably find it less funny. I have a 7-year-old boy, so there's a lot of discussion of farts.
As part of the Farmers Assuring Responsible Management, which is under the National Milk Producers and our Animal Welfare Review. So the farm program started with respect to animal wellness specifically, but it's evolved to also include employee welfare and now environmental stewardship. And so we did an audit of our farm, and it was actually very stunning of all the systems that are in place on our farm. with our manure management and our cropping practices and what our cows are eating, the enteric emissions, just cows being cows, it's a significant portion of our total greenhouse gas footprint. So I know that is the next big focus for the industry, is how do we just make sure that these cows are being as efficient as they possibly can be. But the fact that this little farm, because really in relative to the dairy farming community in the US, and well, less in Canada, but in the US, 300 milking cows is a small farm. But the fact that on this small farm in the corner of Connecticut, which we are not a state known for our dairy industry, we are producing a fresh local food product 365 days a year. We're producing a fertilizer to grow the crops to feed those cows. We're producing renewable energy. We're maintaining 500 acres of open space and 150 acres of forest land for native habitat and a healthy ecosystem. That's an exceptional amount of value to come from one little 300 cow dairy. And, oh, I kind of forgot, also a value added product that's displacing plastic and peat in the market, because we're making a biodegradable planting pot from our cow's byproduct.
That is a lot of things from one farm. When you talk about the timeline of, from cow to pot, how long are we talking? Kind of from when she goes to when the pot is coming off the assembly line.
Yeah. So it's a little bit slower than milk to market, right? So that's 2 days. Yeah. So it's probably about 4 to 6 weeks, probably closer to 6 weeks. So taking into account the time that it's cleaned out of the barn daily, but then it is, the time that it's in our digester, and then the composting time, you're looking at probably about a month and a half.
Sure. Yeah. So how many different kinds, obviously podcasts are an audio medium. What do your pots actually look like? And I'm sure everyone asks what they smell like too, but who's buying them and what are you using them for and what do they actually physically look like?
Yeah. So one of my favorite interactions when I'm at a trade show, typically, which is confusing, people will ask what it's made from. And my trade show booth it's a 10-foot banner with a cow on it. Like, I don't know how much more clearly I can indicate that this is from cows. It's brown. It's called a cow pot.
Yeah, it's not made of milk.
It's not made of, but I would say 90% of people who are willing to pick up my pot, right, that have gotten over the fear of I'm touching this, ick, ew, it's poop, the very next thing that they're going to do is stick it up to their nose. And so I love the fact that they can then take it back away and look at it and say, that doesn't even stink. Because that's not an accident. That's not like, oh, thank goodness for that. I mean, that's intentional. So all that processing that I described of the digester, the separating, the composting, that is for a variety of reasons. But one of the benefits that comes from those processes is that we are reducing the ammonia, which is the prominent smell when you don't like the smell of manure. So we're able to then deliver to market and to hopefully someone's, kitchen windowsill, a pot that's not going to suddenly make their home smell like they're next to a dairy farm. And there's actually the video that I feature on our homepage right now is 45-second clip of asking different people to smell a cow pot and for them to describe what that smell is. So that was critical, right? For us to even be able to take the next step forward in the market was making sure that we weren't sending people home with something that was going to smell like poop. And so, but we currently make 15 different sizes in our facility that's right there on the dairy farm. We're literally a couple hundred feet away from the raw material. And so the sizes range from 3 inches all the way up to a 17-inch round pot. And so that large pot was actually designed for a Christmas tree grower that wanted to be able to sell live plants, so that, people were buying a live tree and then being able to put it in the ground. And then obviously, our 3-inch pot is perfect for, an early start for cucurbits. If you're growing cucumbers or squash or pumpkins, we really like using our 4-inch for basil and tomatoes and peppers. I have dahlia growers that love the 6-inch square because the tubers sit so nicely in that size pot. We made our number 11 for a rose grower because it's a taller, narrow pot. And so to accommodate the root structure of a rose plant, that ended up working out well. And our newest style is a 10-row tray. So it's about 11 inches by 21 inches with 10 narrow rows. And that was designed for a microgreens grower that actually seeds out probably 25 different varieties of microgreens and then does a direct harvest from the tray. And so the benefit to him was that he was using black plastic trays, and because he, wants to, he's only using it for 3 weeks. And so he was paying staff to dump out the contents of the tray after harvest. And then it would have to go through a sterilization process before being filled back up with soil and going through the growing process again. But because you're dealing with plants in their most tender, fragile stage, right, in that first 3 weeks, he can sterilize the tray, but he couldn't deal with the salinity that builds up from the soil and watering system. So he was getting a reduced yield with each reuse of that plastic. And so being mindful of that and also being aware of the challenges of labor, right? So in the farming ag community, one, it's hard to access labor, and two, it's also expensive. And so he was intrigued by a cowpot alternative because he could take the entire tray after harvest, throw it in the compost, and it would get recycled and blended back into his production agriculture.
Now, when it comes to biodegradable stuff, there seems to be, sometimes there's the stuff that almost biodegrades in your hands to the range where it says it's biodegradable, but think it's maybe going to take 20 years. So, I mean, you said you can put it right in the compost, kind of where, obviously they have to be sturdy enough to last for a while, but like how long or like how much water can they retain, like that kind of stuff. Like, what do you recommend in terms of like people who are using them for growing?
Yeah, so cowpots have an indefinite shelf life if they are stored in a cool, dry place. And so then when you do start using them, based on standard greenhouse growing conditions, right? So where you're watering them on a daily basis, we recommend for our smaller style pots, the 3 and 4 inch styles, about a 12-week grow time. And so if you're growing veggies, I mean, that should be plenty of time. After 3 months, your tomato plant's going to be 1.5 feet tall, and it's going to need more soil anyways, right? So if you're not ready to get it out into the garden, you at minimum should probably at that point consider stepping it up into a larger container anyways. So the guidance for successfully growing in a cowpot is, one, not overwatering, because if it's constantly wet, you're basically that degrading decomposition process will start, and it will start prematurely. But you're interrupting that process by allowing it to dry and harden. Because the other thing that you'll notice is that cowpots are an incredible growing environment for mushrooms. And so the spores that naturally exist in your environment are going to latch onto that cowpot. And if that pot dries up, it's no longer a welcome environment for that mushroom. But if it's wet all the time, those mushrooms are going to thrive, right? And it's those same mushrooms, though, are that allow that pot to break down in one growing season. So it's a balance. And so the best way to kind of achieve your desired grow time is letting the pot dry in between waterings. And when it is time to transplant, you are encouraged to put the whole thing in the ground or into your step up patio container, right? So like it can go into a pot with potting soil. That's not a problem. And you want the entire pot submerged so that it's not potentially wicking away water at the lip of the pot. And there's no reason to tear, crush, or disturb the root base. That is the leading benefit of a cow pot to other biodegradables, is that the porous wall allows the roots to grow right through the pot. And when you transplant, you are not disrupting that root system in any way. And within 3 months of being in the ground, 90% of that cow pot is usually broken down. So obviously the bioactivity and the organic matter of your soil will change how quickly things are going to break down, but there's nothing preventing the roots being able to grow through your pot wall.
That's really cool too, Amanda, because, as someone who's done more gardening and production gardening and that, I've used a lot of peat pots, and they do tend to either disintegrate like the first time you look at them and they're just like, bleh, and they're dead. Or you'll be turning the garden over the next year and still digging up chunks of peat pots. And I mean, obviously, I know that peat is a biological material, but it seems like cow shit is much more renewable and a much faster renewable, shall we say, because there is more of it literally all the time. And if you're not having to ship it to produce pots and you're not, the using peat products and coconut less so, but a lot of those biological products are pretty intensive in, how long it takes them to be renewable. I realize, though, we did not ask our most important question, Arlene. What breed of cows do you have? Inquiring minds will need to know.
So we are predominantly a Holstein herd. So when my grandpa and grandma started this farm in 1949, it was predominantly Holsteins, but there's been a few colors that have blended in over the years. There was a Guernsey, there was a Swiss, there was a Jersey, but by and large, it's a Holstein herd. And I want to circle back to, we started this conversation about methane and greenhouse gas emissions. You mine peat from peat bogs, which are wetlands, and wetlands are one of the most critical sources for carbon sequestration. And when you go and start disrupting that ecosystem to mine out that material that is certainly renewable, but it takes about 100 years for a peat bog to regenerate. So you kind of think back to the conversation about the emissions of animal ag, but like in reality, peat has, there's some real consequences to that system. And so, and I I acknowledge that peat ends up being kind of the obvious alternative to our product. It's the primary other competitor. But there's also so many other products on the market that claim to be biodegradable that, to Arlene's point, really are not. I mean, like in a commercial composting facility, maybe, but like me, Amanda Freund, living in the northwest corner of Connecticut, if you asked me what waste stream system I can use to make sure that my product that I want to go to a commercial composter makes it there, I have no idea. I'm pretty sure that my municipality does not support that in any way. So, like, that's all well and good that there's industries claiming to present, compostable and biodegradable items. But I would say most municipalities don't have that waste stream available. So, we're really committed to making sure that our product is suitable for going in your garden and being able to degrade in that environment and that ecosystem. You should not be expected to go find a composting facility that's making windrows that are 100 feet long, right? So this, but it's a balance of meeting your growing needs above shelf and then breaking down quickly enough once it goes in the ground.
Podcasts are free to listen to, but they aren't free to create. Katie and I would appreciate your support as we work to build the Barnyard language community.
Patreon is an easy way for you to make a contribution that goes directly to making the show. As a member of our Patreon community, you get to watch the video version of our weekly updates, complete with questionable hairstyles and clutter. With 3 levels of support, you can choose a tier that works for you.
Keep the podcast going by becoming a patron today at patreon.com/barnyardlanguage.
And so I had one more actual animal question. What kind of bed pack are you using?
Yeah, so the cows all have water beds, but what we're dressing those water beds with are the same manure fibers that we're using for our Cowpots facility. And when we have a crushed, dented pot from production, right? If it gets smushed or if it doesn't meet our quality standards for packing and sending to a customer, those broken cow pots are recycled as bedding for our cows, because the goal is that it becomes, whenever we've used a external bedding material for putting on top of those water beds, you see it in our finished product of the Cowpot, right? I mean, if the hoof trimmer comes that day, I will find cow toenails in the Cowpot. They don't break down that quickly. And we, in our dry cow barn, we have rubber mattresses, and when one of those beds breaks and you start getting these little rubber pieces, I know what they are, but you better believe my customer that has a Cowpot they thought was just cow manure, and there's pieces of rubber in that, that's not okay. That's a problem. And so we try really hard to be able to have as controlled a system as possible. So being able to use our cow manure as bedding really helps with a consistent end product.
I was just laughing at this because we do occasionally compost animals because of, we're doing beef and we're doing sheep. And so occasionally we have a lot of bedding and occasionally a dead animal, and one will, get worked in there and turned over. But when my father-in-law filled my raised beds last year, he used compost from the less sifted part of the pile, shall we say. And I'm just envisioning how your customers would feel. I mean, obviously, you're not going to get a whole skull like I did, but I'm guessing that even teeth in your cow pots would not go over super well with a lot of folks.
No, and so the mortalities are handled differently on our farm. Our compost really is just what's coming from, the barn.
Although cows do lose teeth every now and then, one might fall in there.
They sure, when you're cleaning out the water trough and you're like, oh, the tooth fairy should have shown up today. But no, certainly. I mean, I did actually have a very angry customer send an email once because there was a piece of rubber in their cow pot, and they were very concerned because they are growing organically, and their understanding and impression was that I must be feeding my cows rubber, because how else would it end up in their manure? And so it was a very, very angry email. And so I needed to take 24 hours to cool down before I responded. And I communicated that, like, the rubber you found was because we're actually trying to provide really comfortable, both rubber belting for the floor and rubber in the pads for the cows. So like this was not because a cow ingested it. It's because of the other systems associated with our cows' housing. And then I provided free pots because customer service, the customer is always right. But, it was really upsetting that was their assumption. Their immediate, they just assumed that the only way for rubber to possibly get in a cow pot is because the cow ate it.
So when we're talking about the farm side of things, you were saying your mom has a business. You and your dad, it sounds like, are working on the cowpot side of things. So when it comes to actually running the dairy farm, which is also a more than full-time job, can you talk to us a little bit about that transition? Because I know from talking to you before the podcast, you said that it's not a family member who's running the dairy farm side of things right now. And for a lot of family farms, that transition piece when it's going outside the family can be a tricky thing to wrap your head around or even to manage.
Yeah, so this was certainly a less than conventional approach to continuing to have a dairy farm on our property and for it to not be a Freund family member. So we have been dairy farming here since 1949. I was third generation on the farm with my brother and sister at one point, and even my cousins at one point. But life in 2016, when we moved into our new dairy barn with 5 robotic milkers and Juno the feed pusher and misting fans and water beds. I mean, it is the Taj Mahal of dairy barns. It's a beautiful, beautiful dairy barn. And at that time, there were myself and 4 other members of the third generation that were sitting around the table. But then families happen and interests change. And so by 2020, it was 2 members of the next generation sitting around the table. And I would start my day with feeding cows, and I would then, when that chore was done, and some days it took 2 hours, some days it took 4 hours, that's when I would then go into our cowpots, office. And so the cows and the dairy was always the first priority. And those robots, I think, are an exceptional thing for the welfare and well-being of our cows, But I think for the farmer, for me, it was very taxing because I would get calls at all times. It would be 11 a.m., it would be 2 a.m., and I struggled with that. I struggled so hard with that. I hated the schedule that I was now on because of those robots. And like, we would have weeks where it was great and beautiful, but then we would have a week where I would get a call every single day during the 11 p.m. cleaning. And so I decided and discovered that I would rather pursue the Cowpots operation, and I really didn't see being committed long term where I would the dairy farm would transition to me. So, we put our feelers out there, and our first attempt at finding what initially was going to be a partner to come into the business that was a non-family member, we got really, really close to the finish line, and we thought that it was really going to work. But it's a big deal, right? I mean, it's huge. And so the couple that we were discussing and meeting with at that time in 2020 decided not to move forward with us. And so it was kind of a heartache, right? Because like we finally had wrapped our mind around what this new merged kind of partnership collaboration was going to look like. And then, as you know, COVID was like very disruptive to all things. And so it took another 2 years from that initial prospect that we were working with to find someone else. And so it was a very unique scenario, but it's a dairy farmer from just over the state line in New York State. He had a young man who had worked for his operation and was really interested in having his own dairy. And so the current dynamic is that it is a partnership of Lloyd Vale, who's a dairy farmer from Pine Plains, with his wife Amy, and then their partner Ethan, who's the boots on the ground manager of the dairy operation. So it's a partnership of the three. They basically, the way that Ethan describes it is if you were to take our barn and flip it upside down and shake it out, anything that can fall out is owned by him. So he bought the cows, but he rents the facility, the robots, and the land. And so we're going into 3 years of this relationship, and it has been, it's a challenge like every relationship, but I think it's been great for at the end of the day, it's been a good relationship. It comes with obstacles and opportunities for sure, but I do not miss my phone ringing at 2 a.m. I don't miss it at all.
There are a lot of people who talk about robots as the thing that's going to give you freedom, and yeah, like you said, some days it does. We still milk in a tie stall, but my parents, before they sold their farm, had gone to robots, and there's freedom, but there's also a different kind of inflexibility where when you get that call, then you have to respond to it, or you have to figure that out. At least when you're milking cows in a parlor or a tie stall, or when you're done and the equipment's turned off, you can close the door and think, I mean, things can always happen with animals, but at least on the equipment side of things, things are going to be okay until you walk back in there a few hours later.
You could usually our milking schedule was noon and midnight because the cows were on pasture and we wanted them in during the hottest part of the day. And you could hang up the milkers usually by 6 p.m. and confidently know that you are going in to have dinner without disruption. And that is not the case with the robots. The number of times that I would get called in the middle of making dinner, and it's usually something small. Like it's usually an inflation got, crooked, or, whatever it was, but like it still required you to like go back out to the barn, smell like barn again. Like, holy smoke. So it is a balance, and I think some farms do a really great job of like figuring out the system that works for them. But admittedly, I don't think I figured that system out.
Well, you did in a different way, right?
Yeah. So, and it's been great to watch. Dairy is an incredibly difficult space to be a first generation in. It's such a huge capital intensive space to be able to get into. And so to watch this young guy in his late 20s have the opportunity to be able to get into, a dairy farm, which we were investing in things all the way to the very end, right? So this wasn't a depleted barn that needed a whole bunch of work to get back up and running. So I think, to see that actually be successful, to see a scenario where, the next generation had an invitation, and it came because of a partnership, right? So his partner was able to make it all work out. And so I think hopefully, as there continues to be more and more pressures on dairies, and the average age of the American farmer is getting older, we hopefully can be one demonstration of how a slightly less conservative approach, or a conventional approach to transition, could be a feasible option.
Well, it seems like too, we're in a slightly more dairy area, but it seems like a partnership where everyone is there because they want to be and not because one of the kids has to take over and now you're just kind of drawing straws about who it's going to be, and where decisions and disagreements are more likely, at least, to be about that decision or that disagreement, and not, you remember that time that you broke my Barbie doll when you were 6 and now we're all in our 70s, but we're still going to fight about who mom loved best? And we're going to do all that through what kind of bedding we should be putting down. Like, I see these families who are just living out, generations of disagreement through things where, when all of you are just there about the cows, that seems a lot more straightforward. And that's an excellent point, that he's walking into a business that is still actively maintained, because around here, a lot of, by the time people are selling out, the equipment's shot, you're not getting the best of anything.
When they looked down the line and said there's no one here to take over, yeah, you stop investing, and then there's definitely no one to take over, because yeah, who wants to have to buy into a business and then also build it back up into something else? So when we're talking about business, tell us about being on Shark Tank. What was that like, and like what's the application process like? I'll give us all the details on that.
Yeah, so back in 2006 was our first year going to market, and it was literally me in my family's minivan with some boxes of packed up Cowpots. It was my first job out of college, and I really questioned, actually, my my life goals. But that same year, we had submitted a video as a application for Dirty Jobs on the Discovery Channel, and so we have had that type of exposure before, where we landed on a national TV show. And back in 2000, so the debut episode of Dirty Jobs was January 2007. So we were literally less than 1 year into trying to have a marketable product. We were so far from being prepared to handle the interest that showed up, right? I mean, e-commerce was not a thing in 2007. And if it was, I'm very curious as to what it might have been. Anyway, maybe eBay? Was eBay around in 2007? So we had all this interest, but we're not positioned to be able to know what to do with it. So it was exciting. And to this day, if we're at a trade show, people will walk by and remember that, oh my gosh, I saw this on Dirty Jobs. So knowing the power that kind of exposure has, I, Shark Tank, this was their 16th season. So the show's been around for a while. And there have been plenty of people over the years that have said, you should go on Shark Tank. And I always was pretty fervent in knowing that that's not something we wanted to pursue, because we're not really looking for an equity partner. Like my dad and I at the table, and it was just actually 2 years ago that my uncle divested from the business. So he's retired. So it was my parents, my uncle, his wife, myself. Like, I don't need another person at this table. Like, family business does not need to open the door for, somebody else to be there to be a decision maker. So I was really reluctant about pursuing it because of that. But then acknowledging that the power of having that stage and having what equates to a 10-minute commercial where I get to make the pitch for my product. Like, there's no one better suited to talk about this product. So I begrudgingly pursued it, not knowing anything about what the process was going to look like. And so it was about mid-June of last year that we originally submitted a web form. And it is as simple as a really basic web form on their website. And it was several months of basically every week meeting with their production staff. And it takes a lot of time. Like, it was way more energy than I anticipated with just filling out all the applications and, answering all the questions and drafting the pitch. I mean, it's all the pieces, but they know how to run their show. And so they're very structured and very detailed. But like, meanwhile, you're doing all of the things and you're going through all the hoops that they're telling you to go through without any clarity as to whether or not you're actually going to make it to the end. Like, I don't actually know if, do they start with 500 entrepreneurs and eventually whittle it down to 100? Like, I don't know, right? And so you can't see the landscape. Like, you don't know how many other entrepreneurs are in the same position as you and how many slots there are to fill. So you put in a lot of work not knowing whether or not you're actually going to get to the finish gate. So you have to, like, really be willing to, I guess maybe be optimistic. So anyways, it was very exciting when I finally got the confirmed email saying that a flight was booked for me to go and make my pitch. And so I flew out to Los Angeles, and the pitch happens at Sony Studios. And I mean, that was cool just to see that space. I'd never really imagined what it was like. And it is incredible. There's so many people that make that show sing. I mean, the audio people, the graphics people, the business department. I mean, there was just 100 people running around doing all the different things to make that show come to life. And so we filmed in September, and my episode aired in April. And so for months I heard nothing, and I just assumed that it wasn't going to make it on the show. And so then you're literally left with nothing. Like, you went through all that effort, you went out, had the most stressful pitch of your entire life, and then to, like, not be able to, like, show it off or talk about it. So thank God they aired it. I think I would have gone crazy if they didn't.
Did they air the whole thing?
No. It's
No, so it's a lot shorter on the actual show, yeah.
Yeah, so I was probably on that stage for easily 30 to 45 minutes. And so the actual, like, segment that you're watching is about a 10-minute pitch.
Right. And so what did they offer you? What has that looked like post-show?
Yeah, so I went in, and obviously anybody knows that you go in asking for less than what you're willing to walk away with, right? Because I need to have some room for negotiating. So I went in asking for 10% for 200,000, and that was, following some work that I'd done with Pinion Consulting. So we brought them in to help us really do a proper analysis. And let me tell you, if you ever wanted to get more intimate with the financials of your business, sign up for Shark Tank, because the prep work that I did to make sure that I really understood our cost of production and our profit margin, like, it was really a very intimate, like, intense review of our financial structure of our business. But anyways, we recruited a consultant to help me understand how to even go into this, what our pitch was, what equity are we willing to give up, and where do I need to draw the ceiling. And so that was really important for me to feel comfortable going on to that stage, because there is a certain threshold, like, over a certain amount, I wouldn't be able to afford that relationship. So at the end of the day, he met me at my counter. And so the deal that was made on the stage was 20% equity for $200,000. And so it looked like I was an expert negotiator, but really it's because I was willing to walk away, right? Like I was totally content walking off that stage without a deal because I really wanted just the opportunity for the exposure. And so when he was willing to meet me at my 20%, it was like, oh, I wasn't expecting you to actually like come back and meet me. So, but afterwards, so you make a handshake deal, but then there's a due diligence process afterwards. And so in the months following that airing, it was determined that we were not going to close on the deal. So maybe a little bit of a bummer, but admittedly, I was a little bit nervous about inviting someone else to the table with my dad and I because it is such an intimate setting. I'm not working with, a business partner. I'm working with my dad. And so at the end of the day, it was, I think, for us and the state of our business, knowing that we're anticipating a transition in the coming years, it was best case scenario to get that spot on the TV, showcase our product, and make the world think that I'm an expert negotiator.
Yeah, all wins, right? And are there things that you discovered along the way in all of that work that have changed how you're approaching your business? And have you made, you talked about all the steps and being really, immersed in the financial side of your business. Has it made you reflect differently on the way that you were doing things and looking into the future?
I think I confidently know that there probably is a space and a future where there is a relationship with an investor in the future, or a partner that's not a family member. And now that I've successfully stood in front of five very wealthy investors that were, being filmed for a TV show, like I feel very confident that I can go and sit with any prospect partner. Like I did, I think, the hardest thing. Like I had to create TV worthy content while being really sincere and authentic about my brand and my product. So I think in pursuing new potential relationships, have a lot more confidence in both myself and my business. And the other thing that really, the reason that I got an offer on that stage was because of the prototype packaging that I had tucked away. Like I had hoped that there would be a way to bring it up, through the Q&A with the sharks. And so when the shark Daniel asked, is there anything else you can do with this material or process? And that was an incredible segue to say, actually, yes. And so I pulled out a prototype of our wine bottle package, made some prototypes of this past summer. Like we haven't gone to market with it. I'm only in the beginning phases of figuring out how to even get into the packaging industry. But the reality is, and the sharks know this, gardening is a $2 billion industry. Packaging is an $80 billion industry. So if I had just been on that stage with my gardening pots, there was really not any appetite for that. That's too niche of a market for them. But as soon as I brought out that packaging, I heard Lori and Kevin both audibly exclaim. Like they both were like, oh, and then they started cranking numbers in their head. So I think the future for our business and where I need to put a lot more attention is the prospect of manufacturing packaging material with our unique fiber. And, obviously food packaging is probably not it. I would not advocate that you put your jelly beans in a, carton that's made from cow manure.
Yeah, your takeout food clamshell is not going to be made out of this product.
No, but there are so many things that are not direct food contact where having a truly biodegradable, compostable packaging material made from cow manure is totally suitable.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I feel like, and maybe it's just because I'm gross, I would be fine with an egg carton made of your product because I'm already using biodegradable cardboard cartons. I mean, biodegradable, so to me, I don't know. Probably Joe Consumer would not be so okay with it, but
Yeah, it's a delicate balance for sure. And I think, I mean, maybe with time, as people get more, it seems like socially, culturally, we're kind of trying to go in the direction of more biodegradable options. So I don't think the food space is the lowest hanging fruit for us. I think it's going to be, the reason that we prototyped that wine bottle packaging is because I do believe that for us to have relevance and value in the market, it needs to be B2C. It needs to be business to consumer. I don't think there's any obvious value when, if a winery were to ship their product to a package store, the person unloading that box doesn't care what it's packaged in. Like, it's all going in the disposal outside the back door. But for a consumer who gets their wine subscription every month, they have a personal level of involvement in their own waste stream. And so, like, I mean, I did a food subscription, right? One of those like pre-packaged meal things for a while. And I could not bring myself to throw away that like aluminum cooler packaging. In my mind, it was someday going to serve a purpose for me. But then after 3 months, and I'm looking in my garage at this ridiculous pile of that packaging, realizing I'm never going to do anything with that. So, like, I think that it needs to be someone who's exposed to and having to deal with their own waste, right? And it's going to be someone who's dealing with a subscription model, or they come to, appreciate getting that wine every single month. And so then to be able to showcase the fact that you could take that holder out, put soil in it, start your seeds in it, and it's literally meant to go into your garden, like that feels so regenerative. And they can see the impact of not filling up their recycling bin.
I feel like for me as a consumer and someone who, shops at farmers market, shops at the co-op, that kind of thing too, if it's packaging for my goat milk soap, or I would totally buy yarn that came with a label that was printed on paper made of cow shit. Like, I am absolutely that person. So I can absolutely see that packaging making a lot of sense. Or if my flower bulbs came in a bag where I could stick the bag in a hole with the bulbs and just plant the whole damn thing. How do you visualize scaling up this business? I mean, where are you at in having to import cow shit? Which seems kind of like you're just going to have pumper trucks coming from everywhere with bits of rubber in them.
So it doesn't take that much manure to do what we're doing, right? So we've been able to basically sustain with the 350 cows that are on our farm. And there was a point in time where we were making a private label product, and we made 38 million units. And so at that time, our cows were on pasture during the summer. And so we are next to a mile down the road, there's 1,400 cows, and 2/3 of a mile down the other side of the road are 400 cows. And so we actually, this next year will be our 30th year as an organized group called the Canaan Valley Agricultural Cooperative. So while our milk from all of our farms in this area is marketed through the Agrimark and Cabot Cooperative, we as a local community actually decided to come together to form a cooperative focused on resource management and how we handle our manure. And so it was through that cooperative structure that we've actually been able to access grants a little bit more competitively, because it was supporting and impacting more than one business owner. It was multiple. And so through that cooperative, we're not commingling our manure, but the tactics and approaches that we're taking to managing the resource is a communal benefit, right? Like, we're all in the same watershed. We're all our fields border each other. And so when we were making so many pots that we were actually running 24 hours a day, it literally took less than a phone call. I mean, we called up our neighbor and said, could you bring us a load of manure? And I think before the phone was even hung up, the truck was pulling in the yard, right? I mean, to be able to offer our neighbor farmer a 1 mile distance because otherwise they're traveling 15, 20 miles to bring some of their manure out to their fields. So it actually ends up being an incredible asset and benefit to our community of farmers to be able to provide a resource beyond just applying it to cropland. And so, like I said, we are still using the pilot machine that my dad built. There is commercial production for pulp molding, and we've identified that equipment. So scaling up for us is getting a purchase order that allows us to have the confidence that we're going to have a sustained order, right, to justify scaling up to that equipment. So we know exactly what the equipment is. We just need to be positioned to have the market demand to make that next step.
I would imagine that your prep work for going on Shark Tank made your banker real happy and would make the financing process for expansion a lot easier too, because I'm sure that, most of your banker's customers are not coming in with that level of preparation and understanding of their financial positioning. And that
I hope that our loan officer listens to this. If they don't, I'll share it with them so that they can hear someone else say that we are a top tier customer.
And I would think both the combination of Shark Tank and, going through the farm transition process twice through, right? The one unsuccessfully and one successfully, it does really force you to take a look at all aspects of your business. And that's no small thing.
So, Amanda, I know that you had mentioned as well that you were in the Peace Corps. I'm wondering how you see the ability of this technology to be scaled to more developing areas, because this seems like something, I volunteered pretty extensively with Heifer International and got to see a lot of projects and a lot of how practices can be scaled for different uses. And I'm wondering how you see this being available to folks in other areas.
We get probably the most number of inquiries about franchising or sharing our IP from India, because there's more cows in India than anywhere else in the world. And so it's many Indians are exposed daily to the fact that there's this byproduct, and there's, based on where you are regionally in the country, they use it for cooking fuel or they use it for siding on their homes. The obstacle in the developing world is that usually you're not dealing with a confined operation. And so to do this efficiently, right? I mean, you can certainly collect manure from 5 cows and do some level of making a cow pot. But for this to be a viable business where you're manufacturing them efficiently so that it is actually a product that you could consider shipping, beyond a 10-mile radius, it needs to be at scale. And so I think in the developing world, you're not going to find that as easily. There's certainly, I served in Peace Corps in Zambia. So my community, there was not a single cow. And I remember telling my instructor that I was going to go and I was going to milk those goats because the dairy farmer in me. And then I met the goats. Very quickly decided nothing was getting milked in my village in Zambia. But certainly, obviously, there is a dairy farm in Zambia, but whether or not it ends up, having the desired impact with respect to like providing support for development, I don't know that it does really. But I think when we talk about, expanding this operation beyond our farm gates, the first place in my mind, when we're at a point where we've actually met our capacity, where we can't keep up with market demand, which I hope is not just a fantasy, but a potential reality. Right now, for me to ship a case of cowpots from my door in Connecticut to a farmer in California, it adds 50 to 80% the value of the case ends up being in shipping, right? So a $75 case can cost as much as $50 to ship. And that is just not sustainable. And so there are obviously dairies all up and down the West Coast in Utah where I think this could be a really excellent way to support another farm better handling their manure, providing them a way to add value to it. And we're able to access a market where right now, the folks that are using my products in California are using it because they're really committed to the idea, but like they're willing to pay that shipping cost. The average consumer, probably not. And so, and we've, gotten a lot of inquiries from the UK because they actually, the UK government has banned the use of peat. So by the year 2030, the growers there will not be able to use peat moss or peat pots. And so, our product could be a real contender there. But again, the transport costs is real. So doesn't it make more sense to have another operator making our product and supporting another farm from having, being able to better meet the regulations that they are exposed to by managing this resource better?
And especially when we're talking about places, like California and the UK, where the pressure on land is so intense, right? I know it is in Connecticut too, but we're talking about places where land is so valuable that to be able to use manure in a more efficient way makes so much sense. Plus, being close to the places where people are growing a lot of vegetables and other things that need those pots. So, as a parenting podcast, we're always curious about the relationships between parents and kids, especially those who are working together. And you mentioned that you and your dad are working together on the business. How do the two of you manage both your personal relationship and your workplace relationship when you're together all the time? And like that history piece that we talked about before.
Yeah, we are together all the time, and I do sometimes feel like I'm the oldest of four, and I feel like my other siblings really don't appreciate the value that I'm delivering by being that person in my dad's life. And my sister is partners with my mom in our farm market business, so the two of us are the ones that have kind of tagged on to the two different businesses that we continue to operate. So we do kind of we stay in our lane a little bit, right? So my dad is really the production manager, and I oversee the sales, marketing, admin side of the business. But so we, do very well in those things. When those things start to overlap, there's a little bit of friction, and we really have different perspectives, like really different perspectives. And so we end up having arguments, and usually the best way to like overcome that is time. Like, right? Like, so things can get really heated because he thinks I should respond to a customer this way, and I really feel like, no, I need to respond that way. And so usually I just set it down and I come back to it the next day. And I would say that's like the most critical component to our having a relationship, is to be able to know when to just walk away from a really hot conversation. And it is time. It is like being able to, in our own unique way, just like muddle through it in our own minds and then come back to it the next day. But it is, the only reason I'm here is because of my dad, right? I mean, I was sitting on the stoop of my mud hut in 2012, and I had my weekly phone call with my family, and my dad says to me, "So are you coming home to take on this farm or not?" Right? I mean, it just, as the oldest sibling, it's always kind of been, this is a weird use of phrase, but like the heir apparent, right? I mean, it just always seems like I felt the burden, and I say burden in a really loving way. But like it was clear that the expectation was there always. And so, they gave me the ability to go off, right? I mean, I literally went to a different continent for a couple years. But the expectation for me to eventually find my way back was always there. And I'm in this and doing this and feeling grounded here because I have so much respect for what my dad has built, and I want to be a part of allowing his legacy for innovation and adaptation and environmental stewardship. I want to help move that forward into the next 20 and 30 years. I'm really proud of this work because I know what he's put into it. Like, I saw this man come in at the end of every single work day feeling tired and exhausted, right? But he also made it a priority to be at family dinner. And so to see the toll that being a dairyman in, the 80s, 90s, 2000s was, and to see what our business has become, I want to make him proud. But it's heavy. It's so heavy.
So, Amanda, I was telling you that my kids were home and I just stuck my head out to get them out of my house. They're with responsible adults. I don't want anyone to think that I just left them on the side of the road. Um, I was telling my kids who I was interviewing and what you do, and my daughter wanted to know, she's 8, and she's very much a mini-me. She wanted to know if you had considered making unicorn-shaped piñatas out of cow shit. So, just an idea. I would absolutely buy a piñata made out of your product. See Amanda writing this down. She's like, piñata production, how to.
I've gotten requests for some strange things. I've gotten requests for a ninja dagger, which is like, we didn't quite get far enough in the conversation for me to understand why the heck you would want that made from cow manure.
Is this from a child or an adult?
It was an adult, as far as I can tell. We've gotten inquiries about boxes for holding sustainable source tea. And again, like, the food contact thing was a little bit off for me. Tampon applicators, I'm in the business. I work in the building. I breathe the air in the building, but that is too intimate for me to have cow manure.
Yeah, that seems questionable.
I feel as like the exterior packaging for a wrapped product.
Yeah, no, that's a better space.
It seems rough more than anything.
We've gotten inquiries for biodegradable urns. Like, I think that's kind of a cool one.
That feels like a piñata, though. I mean, what is an urn but a piñata, really?
So piñata is not so far askew. I think we could have on the shelf urns and piñatas right next to each other.
You know what I would actually legitimately buy is pet treats. Because to me, a pet food product that was packaged in something made of cow shit, totally cool. I'm just saying. Because my dogs get freeze-dried liver and whatever,
And I mean, we all know if you have a farm dog that they eat poop anyway.
I have gotten emails from customers where they have a greenhouse and they have a dog, that their dog would snatch the plants growing in the cow pot because they were attracted to the cow pot. And I'm always struggling with how to give them suggestions other than stop letting the dog in the greenhouse.
Yeah. Spray it with citronella or something, maybe.
So I feel like, though, this leads us well into the next question. And knowing that you grow chestnuts, which seems to be it's like a gateway drug, kind of like chickens. Like chestnut trees, we live very close to one of the bigger, older, whatever chestnut replanting business. It might be a cult. I'm not sure. I know the family that runs it. They seem delightful. Still might be a cult. How do you be open to doing new, different, scary stuff? And how can the rest of us encourage the people we know who might be less down with these suggestions? And how do you know when an idea is just really a bad idea? Because sometimes.
Yeah, well, you start small, right? I mean, like, the pursuit for chestnuts is right now 12 trees, right? Like, I didn't clear 2 acres of land and start growing chestnuts. I'm testing it out with 12 trees. And then what's funny though is the tubes that you put on to protect this little young sapling is, protecting it from the birds and the moles and all these things. However, the cows got out because the gate was left open. And let me tell you, there's nothing like a beacon of light, but a white tube in the middle of a field. And the cows knocked over half of them. And so I, at minimum, have 3 of my 12 trees that are not going to be viable for no other reason than the cows. And like, I wasn't prepared for having to mitigate bovine damage on my chestnut crop. So, and again, that's why you start small. So I would probably be prepared with better fencing if I were to do this at scale. But my father obviously has spoken a lot about the diversification on our farm, and he a lot of times uses a word that I makes me uncomfortable every time, but here I am about to share it because it resonates. It's divorcification, because the reality is that you every minute, every hour that you're spending on this new pursuit, and in our case, it was a value added product called Cowpots. That's 1 minute and 1 hour and 1 week that you're not spending focused on your main, livelihood, which is dairy farming in our case. And so you're compromising potentially one thing for the other. And so in our case, which is kind of, it took years of the shift and evolution of our business, but the reality was Cowpots needed to become a standalone separate entity, and it needed to not rely on the farm labor, the farm management. It needed to be its own separate thing. But it's a unclear and bumpy path, because it started in one bay of our farm shop. My dad did it on, the weekends or evenings when his time permitted. And the company finally got to a point where it deserved a lot more attention than just being like the side hustle that you got to when you could. But it was, when we were still running the dairy 2.5, 3 years ago, when it was time to go and do first cutting of hay, I wasn't there to answer phone calls for a week, right? Like, I was out on a rake in the field. And I think in a lot of ways, for the most part, our customers could value the fact that, like, this was authentically a manure-based pot coming from cows that we were taking care of, right? Like, it added to the ethos of our farm and our story and our brand. But there certainly are people out there that when they want to get a hold of you and they can't because you're out on a tractor, it's off-putting and they don't want to do business like that.
And it might also be their busy time of year where they need to get plants in the ground in their greenhouse, right? So you can't expect a customer to wait on you just for a good feeling, or like wanting to do business with you isn't enough. They actually have to be able to do business with you.
100%. So, it is a bumpy ride. It is, and it is not a clear path. I mean, if you were to have asked me 10 years ago what our Cowpots business and structure would look like, I don't know that I would have defined it the way that it is. But I do think, meeting with, service providers, whether it be through your, nutrition company or your bank or your whatever it is, those resources in that network have absolutely been, I mean, our ability to develop and grow the Cowpots business has been because of, our federal and state agencies. It's been because of, the folks that work at Yukon Extension. So we didn't do this in a silo. We did this with our community. And when the knowledge and assets that we needed weren't immediately available, we started fishing, right? We started looking to figure out where we could get that help and assistance. So don't be in a silo, and especially when you're creating a novel concept. I mean, that 18, no, how old was I when I graduated? 21-year-old girl. That 21-year-old girl who was driving around in a blue minivan just after graduating from college, who really knew nothing, right? Like I took some classes in, financial accounting, but I knew nothing. Um, Going into garden centers with a stack of pots that were called Cowpots, people laughed at me. I mean, because it was just like, what the hell? Like, what is this gimmicky thing that you're selling? And so it's just, if you're going to pursue a thing that hasn't been done before or is a different way to approach an issue, like you need to have gumption. You need to have the ability to take, the critics and the negative reactions, and you need to let it fuel you and not extinguish you.
I know I've told my husband that I think one of the benefits of being, I mean, I grew up on a hobby farm, but I'm not a, he's fifth generation, on this place. And one of the benefits of me doing stuff is that a lot of people assume that I'm an idiot. And so they don't bother me about nearly as much stuff. The pressure to immediately perform is very different because they assume I have no idea what's going on. And either they're right and they feel good about themselves, or they're wrong, but I have a longer runway to prove them wrong. Where if people have a high expectation of you and then you do something stupid, it's pretty fast to let them down. But if they already think you don't know what's going on, they'll give you time to figure it out, and it's kind of, you get some leeway to make mistakes and things through.
It's like under promise, over deliver.
Exactly. Although I have to say that sometimes the people who go real big on new enterprises are good for the rest of us, because we got into sheep um, when a livestock buyer came by who had picked up 300 head from someone who had bought his first sheep as 300 head of Katahdins, brought all 300 of them home and realized he didn't like sheep and sold them for pennies on the dollar, which worked out really well for us.
Less so for him.
Yeah, well, I mean, at least he didn't start with 1,000, so it could have been worse.
So we've been talking a lot about sustainability and conservation in ag, and it feels like it always, when it comes from within the industry or from ideas within our industry, that is always a better alternative than having restrictions placed on it and placed on us as farmers, and then having to figure it out or how to adapt to restrictions that are coming from somewhere else. What are some of the areas that you feel like our industry needs to focus on when we talk about the environment?
It is. I think I read an article recently, and when I say recently, I realize now that it could have been 3 months ago. Who knows?
That's recent.
But the pursuit for any company or business that's looking to do marketing is getting people's attention. Like, we are, like, the dynamics have changed so much in the past 10-15 years for the role that social media plays in our life. I mean, I myself, like, I go to the dentist office, I have to wait for 3 minutes. You better believe I'm on Instagram and I'm scrolling. I just, like, it is this urge and this, like, weird habit. Anyways, so there's so much coming at the average person on any given day, and, like, I think about it myself, being a consumer, and what is coming at me and what content I'm exposed to, and how easy it is to just, like, absorb it without doing any critical thinking about it, right? And in production ag, as we get further and further removed from our consumers being associated with the production, for a long time it was the average consumer is 3 generations removed from farming, and I think we're well on our way to making it 4 generations removed. And we're also relying on people to think critically and to be able to have some level of knowledge and understanding of science. And I think, unfortunately, like, we're there's just so much compelling content and AI generating material that is, clickbait, that is like easy for you to want to receive and absorb. So, I think there's so many incredible things that are happening in our industry. I mean, the fact that a dairy farmer is making a alternative to plastic for your planting pot out of cow manure, like that's freaking cool. That's amazing, right? But like we've been doing this for 18 years and I'm still like constantly I'm introducing my products still, right?
Yep.
And like we've been doing this for so long. And so it is hard to get people's attention, and it is so I think, we need to continue to stay relevant in the spaces. We need to take advantage of all the same levels of technology that other industries are taking advantage of. I admittedly am like, my heels are stuck in the sand when it comes to embracing AI for my own stuff. But the reality is, it's happening whether I like it or not. So I think our industry, we're gonna be more compelling and relevant and worthy of attention by embracing all of that technology, because it's here. And there was so much concern over the plant-based meats, right? And that seems to have been a wave. They've really not held their space in the market. But now, there's the cell-based culture, right? So milk grown from yeast in a petri dish. And so that's, who knows, maybe it'll take the same train ride or surf ride as the plant-based meats, or maybe it will actually stick. And so I think we we just we need to be better at communicating, engaging, and being able to take full advantage of every new form of technology, both on farm, right? If it's the facial recognition of cows for farmers to identify and do, like, symptom analysis, that's one thing. But then it's taking that same mindset about how we use technology and being able to apply it for a broader consumer facing space.
So, Amanda, we ask all of our guests, if you were going to dominate a category at the county fair, what would it be? And categories can be real or made up to ensure that you win.
So I guess Eastern States, which is our version of a state fair, there's one spot on that fair that I go to every single year, or I guess every year that I go, and it's the cream puffs. They're exceptional. And so I would, whether it be making the cream puff or eating the cream puff, but that is my category.
Cream puff adjacent. I love that. So we will go ahead and do our cussing and discussing segment. If you're a listener and want to submit yours, you can use our SpeakPipe or send us an email at barnyardlanguage@gmail.com. Katie, what are you cussing and or discussing this week?
I don't really have anything.
Your life is perfect?
Well, I wouldn't go that far. So here's something. So I've been laid off from my job, which I think most of our listeners know. And the way my brain works is that my brain just really likes bright, shiny things to think about. And having more free time and having more time on social media and having more time to just sort of poke around in the world, my brain is so full of thoughts and ideas, and they're just like leaking out of my ears. And it's enjoyable and also tremendously overwhelming. I obviously didn't have any thoughts about the cussing and discussing, but I have a lot of thoughts about a lot of other things.
That's all right. There's a lot of thoughts about a lot of different things. I hear what you're saying.
Amanda, what do you have to cuss and discuss?
I think so. Kind of calling back on something that was mentioned earlier in this conversation, but the greenwashing associated with, using terms like biodegradable and compostable, like it is when we're trying so hard to be really, really delivering to the end user a product that truly is 100% biodegradable, and to have so many people reluctant and resistant because of their experience with things that have, I have plastic bottles in my house right now that have a stamp on it that say biodegradable, and like in no way, shape, or form is that accurate. And so it just, knowing that it's so difficult for people to know, and have faith and confidence in the information that they're being given, and it just, for brands and products to be able to use these like big wave like statements about it being natural, sustainable, regenerative, biodegradable, like there's so little regulation and restriction on how any of that terminology is used. And I think, unfortunately, it's very much to the disservice of the ones that are like committed to making sure that the product is following regenerative practices or is truly biodegradable. So I guess that's, I didn't cuss once there, but our shit is better than all the other biodegradables because it really does biodegrade, and it's renewable, and it's recycled, and it is made on a dairy farm in America.
Amanda, I am right there with you. This gatekeeping, rule based, accessory based, corporate money making based bullshit around self sufficiency and sustainability. The part that really puts me over the top is the home composting systems. And I get that people live in cities and composting is not accessible for them. But these systems I see being sold for home composting that will magically somehow compost all of your kitchen waste into soil in like 3 days by, I imagine, using immense amounts of electricity. And the idea that you should then pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars for this plastic thing that is sucking down electricity. And even if, God forbid, you live out in a country like we do, where you can just compost in a pile like a normal person, there's books and courses and thermometers and rules and rules and rules about the right way to do everything. And there are definitely more efficient ways or less smelly ways or biologically safer because you're killing organisms ways or whatever. But this, anything that puts a barrier in front of people for being able to be even the slightest bit more self-sufficient, because we're telling them that if you're not spending hundreds of dollars and investing months of your life finding out the best possible way to compost, and if, God forbid, your chickens just spread your compost pile around and then you give up and let them eat it anyway, not speaking from experience, that you shouldn't even try to do anything to increase your self-sufficiency if you cannot do it this way. And, if you're 1 degree too cold, your compost is ruined and you are now just a drain on human society. And it's just bullshit, And you can make your sourdough without spending hundreds of dollars on sourdough courses. And maybe it'll suck and you'll have to start over, but it's just sourdough. Like, it's not. We've made all these things so aspirational. I think that's what it is, this aspirational self sufficiency and the labeling and sales thereof.
And so maybe this is TMI, but like I just this morning in my kitchen was thinking to myself, like, what level of sustainability is my life, right? So like, I'm a single woman in a house with a dog, and I think about the, what it takes to support and supply this house with energy. And I think about how much trash leaves my house. And so, like, just looking around, right? Like, I am using cloth napkins instead of paper. But like, I, to your point, being striving to be better and do better, but not for the aspiration to literally disable or handicap my ability to do enough and to I mean, yeah, I to your point, like the $995 plastic receptacle to be able to create biochar from your food scraps. I mean, it's shocking and amazing. And the fact that meanwhile, this last weekend, a customer came into our farm market looking for three heat treated pallets so he could create basically a three-sided frame for his compost pile, right? Like, talk about extremes. Somebody who is willing to, toss a couple pallets in their back, uh, versus going online and buying a receptacle to do the same job. But yeah, it is so hard to be exposed to the intimacy of so many people's lives through social and not either be stuck with imposter syndrome or I'm not doing enough. It's a heavy social, like, structure and weight to be part of. And so being able to, like, I mean, I set a little thing on my phone, right? So after 30 minutes of using social apps, it sends me a notification saying, like, hey, you have 5 minutes left. And like, I I think it's so important to, like, really be mindful of how much of all of that we expose ourselves to, because, like, enough sometimes is enough.
I will admit that I've made my real hobby is training the algorithm on my Instagram so that it literally only shows me crafting content, historical clothing content, historical cooking content, and animals. And it's amazing.
Use the robots to your advantage, right?
Use the robots to your advantage. That's the long and the short of it, because otherwise you just get sucked into this rabbit hole, at least if you have kids and are a proper farm mom. Like, are you even a farm mom if you're not wearing linen at all times and a huge floppy sun hat with your extremely attractive and well behaved children who are always barefoot and yet somehow always clean? Anyway, Arlene, what do you have to cuss and discuss?
Before we went into this conversation, I was actually thinking this, on similar lines. I was thinking about on the consumer side of things, like you said, Amanda, you're in a store and you're like, I'm going to buy a thing and it's on my list. I'm going to purchase it, and looking at the types of packaging it's in or the claims that are on it and thinking, like, what is the right choice, right? And is there, I mean, in lots of ways, there are no right choices. We've talked about that lots on the show. There's no perfect way to parent. There's no perfect way to farm. There's no way to be a perfect consumer because there's always a consequence. We just finished watching The Good Place with our 17-year-old and looking at, like, they made this decision but ended up getting, points for whatever, right? Like, there's consequences to all of our actions, but I guess hopefully intent means something and being conscious means something, and that, maybe at the end of the day, if we've made more good choices than bad, then hopefully we're, in the good place. Whatever that looks like for us. So yeah, same, I agree with you guys. There's a lot of bullshit out there, but we also still have to function in the world and feed ourselves, and so we're going to make choices every day to that end. And we've got places to buy things that, are, it's not always, the ethics and the environment are not always taken into account, but hopefully more and more that is happening.
Agreed. Agreed.
Anyway, we want to thank you so much, Amanda, for joining us today. If people are interested in the Cowpots in terms of buying or just seeing what you're up to, on looking at you, seeing you on Shark Tank, where should they find you online?
Cowpots.com, Cowpots. And obviously, Facebook and Instagram are easy places to find us as well. Similarly, Cowpots, and for Instagram, Cowpots Girl. And one day I did wonder whether, like, at some point I would have to become Cowpots Lady or Cowpots Woman. Like, but I think that girl is just gonna work for until I'm 85 years old and still scrolling through Instagram.
Yeah, that's right. Everyone else has moved on to other platforms and we're still on Instagram. It'll be, yeah. Thank you so much. It was great to meet you today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you for joining us on Barnyard Language. If you enjoy the show, please support us on Patreon with a donation.
Big thanks go out to our show editor, Krista Paffrath at the Rural Podcast Network.
Please rate and review the podcast wherever you listen and follow the show so you never miss an episode.
If you want to connect with other farming families, join the private Barnyard Language Facebook group.
We are always in search of future guests for the podcast. If you or someone you know would like to chat with us, get in touch.